Hey, I'm CARBO brother. I'm Chris Nelson, president of CARBO. Really excited to introduce the Smith Wesson M&P trigger spring kit for your Smith Wesson M&P 1.0, 2.0, from the 9mm, the 357, the 40, the 45. We got it all covered. A great, comprehensive, all-in-one trigger job for the M&P pistols. Just love the way it transforms this trigger from something mediocre to something really phenomenal and just really consistent, smooth, clean breaking trigger pull. Really love the way it feels now. Awesome. So we're breaking right now at 3.5 pounds. We started at almost 7. So we got about a 50% trigger pull reduction with this kit, with the sanding, the polishing. Best way to do it, man. If you've got the time, it is well worth it. You don't need to spend all your money on the finished product, the finished machine parts that are already polished. You can do this yourself. It's a really great way to do it. I love doing this sort of trigger job. Takes a lot of time, yes, but that brings me to the next point. If you don't have the time, you don't want to do it, you can go ahead and give us a call, set it up. We're a Type 7 manufacturer, so you can just mail your gun to us, and we can do all the work in-house. So we have the custom shop, charge a flat hourly rate. We'll give you a quote on what it'll take to do this, and you're in and out the door, man, with a brand new, feels like a brand new pistol. Brand new clean breaking trigger. That's just great when you reel out, too. It's perfect. It's not like it's something that's, you know, you're shaking at the end trying to break it. It needs to be a smooth, clean trigger pull that's got a nice, crisp break at the end. You know, it's that gradual take up and release. It's phenomenal. And the reset's spot on too. I love the way this trigger feels now. Whereas before it was just something, not even really talk about. But now, so much better, so much cleaner. Hope you guys get the same results. Looking forward to it. Post your results in here. Any subscribes or likes we can get, we love that. Always a good way to show your support. Throw a comment in there. If you get some great results, we always love to hear it. Other guys do too. So I can sit up here and blab all day long how great it is, but proof is in the mix. So looking forward to what you guys get. Let's get on our tabletop. Show you how we did this. Parts needed for this build: the Smith Wesson M&P 9mm, 357, and 40 cal trigger spring kit. Works for all three calibers, doing the frames being similar sizes. We do have a 45 caliber kit, but it's different due to the larger frame. In this kit, you're going to get a 1x1 inch 1000 grit silicon carbide sandpaper, which is great for knocking off some of those metal burrs and any of those rough surfaces, machining lines, things of that nature, and particularly on that striker safety. So we're going to focus a lot of attention on that, but we're also going to use that on the Sear. We're going to use that on the trigger bar. Really great way to help get some of that roughness out of the trigger pull. Synthetic grease with PTFE. We're going to use these two in conjunction for a nice wet sand, but also you can use that synthetic grease in some of the engagement surfaces, so really handy there. A lighter custom striker spring, a lighter custom striker safety spring, a heavy duty trigger return spring. This is a must due to the way that it's designed. It helps reduce the trigger pull. It helps make the trigger much better. Feels cleaner, feels smoother. Rather than a spongy trigger, it's going to help give you a nice crisp reset. Once that trigger's pulled, it's going to spring right back, and the pull is going to be nice and steady too. It's not going to be the spongy, weird kind of trigger pull. So really like this. This kit is going to do a significant job reducing the trigger pull anyway, so there's no real need to worry about a heavy-duty trigger return spring. It's going to help, trust me, in a lot of ways. Especially trigger reset's a big deal as follow-up shots. A custom lighter Sear spring and a trigger return spring assembly tool. Really a great way to help take some frustration out of this installation. And then the polishing kit, this is optional, but a great way to get a nice, smooth, clean trigger pull. Really like this. Great. I mean, I am a huge fan of polishing, so if you've got the time, do it. Highly recommend it. It's going to make it a night and day difference. You're already there anyway. We're going to run through it quickly in the video. But in the kit, you get 3 felt bits for your rotary tool, whether it be a Dremel or the $8 option from Harbor Freight. Works in all of them. Microfiber towel, ½ ounce can of Flitz polish, industry standard, and then your 6mm nitrile gloves. Great for dexterity when you're holding those little parts, and it's going to get messy. Tools needed for this build: 1/8 inch punch, 3/32 inch punch, 1/16 inch punch, hammer, bench block, micro tip flathead screwdriver, 1/16 inch Allen key, Bluetooth 42 Loctite. This is a sub 2000 assembly dowel. Any sort of dowel will work, but if you want this, you got it on the website. Need some sort of masking tape. You will need a heat gun to remove that rear sight set screw. It's got red Loctite on it from the factory, but if you've already done it, you're golden, but this will be a big help. The Dremel if you're going to do any sort of polishing, but a rotary tool of any kind will work just fine, so no need to worry about spending money on a Dremel, Harbor Freight, or any sort of cheaper option. As always, guys, make sure you're wearing iPro. Before we get started, let's go ahead and take this opportunity together, check our firearms, make sure they're clear, check the chamber, check the bolt face, check the magazine well. This firearm's clear. Let's see what kind of factory trigger pull we're starting with. 6 pounds, 12.8 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. Six pounds, 11.8 ounces. All right, so we get started with the basic field strip, so we'll go ahead and rack the slide back. All right, there is that Sear deactivation lever down in there, that yellow lever. You can do that, or you can just go ahead and flip the takedown lever down, let the slide go forward. Now you pull the trigger and pull the slide right off. All right, so we got our slide in one hand, frame in the other. Go ahead and set that frame aside for a minute. We're going to focus on the slide disassembly first. All right, so for slide disassembly, we're going to remove the recoil spring and guide rod. So go ahead and compress it, pull it out, and then the barrel will just pop right out like this. Put the barrel aside. Now what we need to do is focus on removing the striker and the striker safety. Notice these two pieces, how they're sticking out on both components. These are the pieces we're going to polish and take some nice attention to. Make sure we get rid of some of these little machining lines here, right? Look at that. A lot of defects there, and it's real noticeable when you start to move even your micro tip over it or your fingernail, you'll feel it. So we'll get these items out and we're going to polish real well in these places particularly, but you can polish the entire part, not a big deal. So to remove the back plate, all we have to do is push down on that plastic striker sleeve. So you can see it sticking out right there. Just going to push down and that back plate just comes right off. Real simple. Now, you know, this is the striker safety function here, so we're going to push down on it and that's going to allow the striker to release. So keep your finger over it, push down. All right, there is the striker. All one complete piece. So we're going to actually disassemble this completely so we can do the polishing, but we are going to swap the spring after the polishing. Now we just need to get the striker safety out. To do that, we've got to get this rear sight off. Not a big deal. It's just going to take a little heat if this is the first time you're cracking it loose because it's got some red Loctite on it. So let's get our heat guns ready. All right, so the heat gun's warmed up. Just going to give it about 20-30 seconds of heat on that set screw right there. You know, it may help just to hold it off the table and just give it good up close contact, move it around. It's not going to hurt the finish or anything like that. All right, use as much heat as necessary. I've already broken mine loose, so it's not really a big deal for me right now, but the first time it definitely was. 1/16 inch Allen key, go ahead and just remove that set screw. All right, there's a set screw there. So go ahead and set that aside. The set screw's out on the rear sight, so we're good. Now take notice where that striker safety is. All right, this is the side with the striker safety on it that we want to push out. So that way there we can get access to that spring much easier than if we went the opposite way. You're going to have to move the sight the whole way. This we'll just need to barely move it a little bit and then we'll get access to it. Bench block, dowel, 3/32 inch punch, hammer, a couple little pieces of that masking tape come in handy. Layer it on there and then crease it down each time so you can see that face. We want to hit it right here or here, but this is the best spot I find. Each time we layer it on, you know, we're working that crease in there so we can see it and get a good bite on it. All right, now we'll take our 3/32 inch punch. We'll get it right on that crease, give it a few good taps. And it helps to move that punch on that tape because it'll rip through the tape eventually. So just kind of reset the tape each time after you give it a tap or two. You've also got that wooden dowel too. All right, let's switch over to the wooden dowel. You can see it halfway there. That little plastic piece is the retainer for that striker safety. Keeps it all in line, kind of like a guide. Helps compress it too under that sight. Try the dowel out. All right. Okay, so there it is. So you can see that striker safety spring right there and the little guide right here. So we'll just pull out that spring and guide. Okay, set that down. And now we've got access to our striker safety. So just pop it over, falls right out, just like that. Notice this little rim up here. That's what locates inside on the slide. You see there's a recess there for that rim to locate on. All right, so now we can go ahead and set slide down. The rest of the items, we'll put them together and go over everything real quick. All right, so at this point, the slide is completely disassembled, which is awesome. We're nearly there. You got your barrel, you got your recoil spring and guide rod, your slide, your striker assembly here. We're gonna go over that. We're gonna remove everything here in a minute. And then you've got your striker safety spring and the little guide, then your striker safety, the back plate, and then the rear set screw that goes into the rear sight on the slide. All right, so we got our striker assembly here. You can see how everything goes together. So we've got our striker spring. This is the retainer that holds the striker spring on the striker. And then we've got our striker sleeve back here. You can see how the striker locates inside the sleeve. So this wider portion of the striker locates in that bigger channel right here in the sleeve. That little portion sticking out, so it's good to take notice of. When you compress the sleeve, you can see there's a little tiny spring in there. That spring goes forward of the engagement surface here on the striker, so we'll take notice of that, remember that. So it's real quick to disassemble. We just basically need to press down on this portion of the striker and compress the spring, pull out the collar. So the bench block's got this handy little feature in here. So I just push down right here on the spring, and then the collar comes right out, the little retainer, and notice how it went in just like that. All right, so you got these little channels right here that locate inside the spring, and there's a recess on top. So it slides into that little squared off portion of the firing pin right there. So handy to remember. Set that down, pull off the factory spring, set that aside, and then the sleeve comes right off with the spring, just like that. So we'll set the sleeve and the little spring aside. So we've got our striker completely disassembled. I'm gonna start a separate bag for all the stock springs. Might be a good idea because we're gonna go through the kit here. Might as well now. So this is the trigger spring kit for your Smith Wesson M&P 9mm 357 40 cal. Similar frame, so the kit works for all those. Got a 45 caliber option as well, so if you need that, just select it on the site. We'll go ahead and open this baby up. We're gonna save the bag, but do what you want. Rip it if you want. I'm gonna keep this bag. I'm gonna put some of the springs in it. All right, so you can see the kit here. So we've got a whole cluster of stuff here. So we've got our 1000 grit silicon carbide sandpaper. We're gonna use that. Our synthetic grease with PTFE, we're gonna use that. We got our striker spring here. We're definitely gonna have a need for that in a second. We got our Sear spring here. Won't need that yet. So I'm just gonna push up here with the trigger return spring. Won't need that yet either. And then our trigger return spring assembly tool. So these three items I'm gonna put back in the bag. And then our striker safety spring, we're gonna need that. So we'll set that down the table. So I'm kind of using the MCARBO bag to keep the MCARBO springs in, and I made another bag for the stock springs. Might help so you don't get them mixed up because it's really easy to do. All right, so our factory springs still captured there in that striker safety guide. These two look very similar, so they are kind of hard to tell apart. If you do get them mixed up, you have to put them in each hand and just see which one feels lighter. That's the only tell. So the MCARBO spring is lighter, so we'll go ahead and we'll pop off the factory spring. We'll put it in that factory bag, and then we'll go ahead and we'll take the MCARBO spring. We'll insert the MCARBO spring right on that little detent right there on the guide, and it locates right in place. All right, and we'll set that down. All right, for this portion, we're gonna need our striker and our striker safety right here, and 1000 grit silicon carbide and the synthetic grease. So we'll use these items, knock off burrs, and move on. All right, so we'll go ahead and open up our synthetic grease. We're gonna get some grease on this silicon carbide sandpaper, going for that wet sand. And if you put a little dab on the bottom, it'll help keep it in place. It's always handy. And then we'll start immediately on this striker safety right here. So this will be great. We're gonna get the top, lay it flat on the table, move it back and forth, or you can do a swirl motion like this, that helps. As long as you're keeping it a uniform movement, you're good. Do this for about 5 minutes or so, checking your progress along the way, making sure it's coming out smooth. It's 1000 grit, so it's gonna be real hard to change the geometry, so you're covered there. That's why we only include a small portion of it. You can't really do any damage with this. This is finishing work, so we're not striking out here to try to do some major geometry change. We're just trying to smooth out the material, make sure there's no burrs or anything like that on it. Machining lines, very common. Just check your progress every minute or so, make sure you're getting a nice smooth finish. Oh man, and check it with your fingernail too. That is a huge tell. It's already improving. So as long as you can't really feel that burr, it'll grab you right there in the center usually. There's like a little dimple there when it's falling off the lathe. That's the last piece. When they're turning this on the lathe, the last piece is connected and it just drops off into the bucket. So usually there'll be a dimple on there. Gonna continue sanding, nice even uniform pressure. I'm not pushing real hard, just kind of medium. Nice circular motion. You can kind of feel your way through it. You'll feel those burrs and machining lines, so you'll know when you get into that rhythm and it starts smoothing out. Just stay with that. I'm going clockwise, counterclockwise, until I feel some more roughness. And then eventually I'll start feeling smoothness because we're getting there. Yeah, look at that. Already shining up. It's amazing what a little bit of finishing work can do for you. And you'll see when you put it back together and you feel that trigger for the first time, you're going to be absolutely amazed. That's what I love about this finishing work. Although it may be a little tedious, man, this is a great little Saturday project. I find it a little therapeutic. And then all your buddies are going to be jealous. And then they're going to want you to do this for them. All right, man. Getting there. So stay at it, all right, until it's nice and smooth. The other thing I want to point out is this one's already been done a little bit. So one of our guys already got to it, but yours may have some sharper edges up here. All right, what we want to do is take those sharp edges and make them into nice little rounded radiuses. So taking that hard edge away and putting a radius on there makes it so much easier for that trigger bar when it's coming along and hits the side, because it's got to hit the side and then go up and over, compress it. So we want to make sure that we make it a nice little smooth transition. So those hard edges on the side does not need to be a chamfer like this. This is just a hard edge here, hard edge up top. So what we'll do now is we'll take the paper, we'll fold it up, throw a little more grease on it. Throw a little grease on the part if you like. That always helps too. And just kind of take it by hand and do this. So you're attacking that sharp edge on top of the striker safety. And just going around and smoothing it out. And you can hear that roughness. All right, so we're breaking that hard edge. The other thing you can do is you can basically just wrap this paper around it and just turn it. It might be a little difficult, greasy hands, so got your towel and your kit, if you got the polishing kit, or any rag will do you. And I'm just turning it. I'm just working those hard edges against the paper. Oh yeah. Just keep checking your progress as you go. Nice. So that's what we're going for. We're getting rid of those hard edges and we're getting a nice, smooth, rounded top. It's not going to hurt it. It's not going to affect any of the function in a negative way. It's just going to make it that much smoother. So we're going to continue with it. Working those edges. Adding more synthetic grease as you need to. You know, it's not going to hurt either to go ahead and just knock off anything on the sides, but really there's not. It's mainly on the top. All right, so there we go. So smooth it out to your liking. Just needs to be nice and smooth. Check on the top with your fingernail if you feel that burr still. You know, you're not going to take off a ton of material off the top. You're just kind of evening it all out nice and smooth. That's the idea. And the polishing is going to work wonders too. All right, so we're done with that. On the striker, there's not a whole lot. Just this engagement surface up here. So what we'll do is we're just going to hit that real quick. You can throw a little grease on it. Take my paper, and I'm just going to rub it just like this. You know, don't put it on the table and press hard. We're just sort of gently going over this surface. This is an engagement surface with the Sear, so we don't want to get too crazy. Just knocking off any kind of burrs, any rough machine lines. Getting the top. And get that edge just a hair. Don't go crazy with it. We're just smoothing stuff out. Check your progress. Oh yeah. Identify any more roughness and just kind of finish it up. And polishing is going to make it a world of difference. This is just kind of getting a lot of the heavy work out of the way for the polishing. And by holding it in your hands like this, you're not really risking a major geometry change. You know, if you were pressing down the table, you'd be getting a little bit more. We're just kind of just holding it, rubbing it, getting rid of all those burrs, and that's good. So we'll jump right into the polishing now. You can see we're off to a good start. Should feel nice and smooth at this point. We even hit that edge just a hair, not a lot. You know, all these little subtle incremental changes make a world of difference once we get back together. Let's go ahead and do some polishing. All right, so for this segment, you're just gonna need your striker safety and your striker and the polishing kit and your rotary tool. Go ahead and get set up real fast. If this is something you don't really want to do yourself, you know, the sanding, the polishing, you can always send it in to us. We have custom shop services. We'll do all of this for you. So I get it too. Not everybody has the time, so we'll happily do it. 3 bullet-shaped felt bits, great for the rotary tool. You got your microfiber towel. I would highly recommend doing this not on the kitchen table. If you want to battle with the wife on this, man, stuff is going to fly. So I even moved all the other parts too. So the frame, the slide, everything, I moved it to a different table. I just don't want to get flits all over it and have to clean it. So just be advised that flits is going to go at least double arm's length. So we'll take our flits, open it up. All right, we're going to coat all the parts. We're going to coat the bit as well, get it saturated. All right, go ahead and throw it in the Dremel. All right, get the standoff that you want. It's nice to have a little extension there. All right, so we're all good to go here. Got some flits on the bit. We'll start off with the safety first. Just kind of saturate it and just go to town on it. All right, you should already be wearing eye pro, but if you are not, definitely do it. There's no other way to polish. You don't want flits in the eye. All right, let's get busy. One thing I like to do with these, pinch them like this, and then it'll rotate in your hand. It'll get a little hot, but at least we got the gloves. Sometimes get a little squirrely on you too. All right, we can go ahead and check our progress, see how we're doing. I mean, that thing was blinging up, man. You saw, oh, look at that. It's already blinging. There's still a little residue in there, and we cleaned up some CLP. It's gonna be beautiful. So we focus most of our time up here because it's most important. This is the engagement surface. Hit the outside edges over here. Not a big deal. Looks cool, but this is gonna be most important. We don't want any burrs, obviously, on the sides because it's moving up and down inside that cutout in the slide. So yes, it's important, but particularly up here, we got it. So now we'll focus on the striker as well. Engagement surface up here. All right, we're gonna get this whole top portion really well. And then we'll go once over on the actual striker itself. Coat it up. You can see this bit's pretty black now. So I like to coat up the bit and then just wipe it off. That always helps. Just kind of clean some of that grime off of there. All right. Whole thing's saturated. It'll definitely start heating up on you. All right, let's check our progress here. Oh yeah, it's starting to come along now. We went a good once over the whole part. We're gonna focus again on this end here, and then that should be it. But you can do as much as you want. You know, look how black that bit is. A lot of crap came off of there. So you can spend a good amount of time doing it, as much or as little. All of it's gonna be an improvement for sure. Saturate the bit. You know, these bits will last a long time if you're careful with it. Just try not to hit the sharp edges as hard. I think I was kind of trying to speed it up, and I definitely just gouged it a couple times. I definitely wasted that bit. So the more delicate you are, the longer your bit will last. I was pressing pretty good and hard on there. Trying to hit my 1 hour time, trying to compete with myself here on video time. But look at that, man. We got the result we wanted. That thing is just blinging. That's gonna feel great. Buttery smooth. All right, man, there we go. So we're ready here. We can go ahead and put this back together. Go ahead and put the slide back together, and we're ready to move on to the frame. All right, so here's the finished result right here. So you can see your striker safety just blinging on this top surface, man. I just cleaned it up some CLP, gun oil, anything will work. You know, this is stuff we have. This is the military standard, which I love. Brings me back, man. I love that CLP smell, nothing like it. So you can see blinging, man. I mean, this is what you want, nice and buttery smooth. Oh, that's awesome. So if you can kind of move your fingernail all across it without feeling any real rough burrs or machining lines, you're golden, man. That's gonna feel great. So I've got the striker assembly up here, all the components together. We got our barrel and recoil spring and our striker safety with the spring and the back plate and the set screws. So we'll go ahead and put the striker back together now and then put the rest of the slide back together. All right, so putting the striker back together, first thing, I'm gonna take that sleeve with the little spring that came with it. All right, it just kind of pops through just like that. And then we're gonna orient it correctly. Remember, this wider edge is gonna be in the channel, and it's gotta match that little feature right there. So it's pretty straightforward. You can see there's really only one way for it to go together. So it's gonna ride in that channel, this little portion sticking out the side. All right, there's a good view of it right there. You can see how this will operate. So compress it just like that. Then take our lighter striker spring, we're gonna slide it right over the top. And then we're gonna push down on this feature on the bench block so that we can compress the striker spring all the way down. And we're gonna take our little retainer and drop it in just like this. These little narrow tabs are gonna go inside the spring, and it just drops right over that flat portion on the striker and then lines up with the spring and locks and locates in place just like that. All right, everything's together, good. So our striker assembly is back in order. So we can set this down. Next, we're gonna take our striker safety and the striker safety spring, the lighter spring, of course. We're gonna insert that in like that, then the little follower rests just like that. But we're gonna go ahead and put some synthetic grease all over this part. It's gonna be nice and smooth and buttery. It's gonna work like a dream. So this portion is the engagement surface. We want it on the inside of the slide, so we're gonna drop it in just like this. And it's gonna be captured inside the slide just like that with the spring in place. And you can see it on the other end there. Perfect. So what we'll do now is need to get our rear sight over top of that little guide and compress the guide while we move the sight. So let's do that real quick. All right, so for this part, I just like to take my micro tip to compress this striker spring guide right here. And we have to make sure it's compressed and under the rear sight as we're tapping it over. So I just kind of hook it like that under the sight, keep it in one place. And then I've got this hammer here with a little plastic piece on the end, so I can easily just tap it over. If you don't have that, just put some masking tape on this side of the sight and then just give it a few good taps to get it started, just so it'll capture that striker spring just like that. All right, and it's mostly there. We'll just have to hold it a little bit and it'll be easy. It's much easier to do it that way. All right, mostly there now. You can see the little guide in there still. Nothing got bound up or anything, so we're good. A few more taps and we're home free. I can use my dowel or I can use a punch, masking tape. Just get it lined up where you like it. All right, that's perfect. So we're all set. We can put our set screw back in place. Now we'll take the rear sight set screw, take the blue 242 removable Loctite. You don't really need the heat temp rating unless you're just shooting a ton and you find that the set screw is coming out. The blue Loctite should be perfectly fine. And go ahead and tighten it right up. The nice thing is it's technically removable and you won't need heat to remove it next time. All right, so there we go, clean it up. And we got that part finished, which is the biggest, most difficult part of it. Now we'll just take our striker assembly that we just put back together. We'll slide it right in. Now we're gonna need to compress that safety to get it all the way in. So get it until it hits that safety, compress the safety. Now you wanna make sure that sleeve is compressed as well. So make sure you compress it enough so that sleeve will lock and locate just like that. All right, so it's locked and located. It's as far as it'll go at this point. Now we're just gonna take the back plate We'll slide it right on, get it started. Now we're going to take our little micro tip and push down on that sleeve so we can get clearance for the back plate to go right on. Snaps right on just like that. Make sure it's fully seated. It is. We're good. All right, so everything's in place. So you shouldn't be able to move that striker forward unless you push on the striker safety. And you can see the striker moving right there. All right, good. So the slide's mostly back together. Just got to grab the barrel, throw that in, just like that, and then take our recoil spring and guide. You see this smooth portion here. This portion here with the little nut on the front is going to go forward. We're going to compress it, get it to locate right on that little face there on the barrel. All right, so we're all set. The slide is completely back together. We can go ahead and just set this aside and focus on the frame now. All right, so now we're focused on the frame. So we've got our takedown lever here, our locking block here. You can see the trigger bar in here. You can see the Sear right here. This is a Sear engagement surface, this portion right here that locates with the striker. So the striker and this portion of the Sear interact. And then also pay attention, you'll see how the trigger bar engages the Sear right there. So we want to make sure we polish all of these portions of the trigger bar and the Sear. So it's going to be really great when we do this polishing. It's going to really clean up that trigger pull. And then your trigger return spring in here, obviously. So real straightforward, real simple. We're going to start with the front. There's two major takedown pins right here. They're universal, they're the same, so we can just tap them out. Try to keep them separated though, it's most ideal. So we'll take our 1/8 inch punch and we'll tap out this forward pin. All right, first pin is out. You can see it's standard roll pin. So go ahead and we'll grab the other one next, back here. Second pin, pretty straightforward. They are identical. So no need to worry about getting it mixed up, but I'll keep them separated just for the heck of it. All right, then our takedown lever, we'll just turn it all the way up and pull it right out. Just kind of give it a little wiggle there. All right, so there's the takedown lever right there, pretty straightforward. Set that down. And then it's a matter of getting the locking block out. So we'll take our punch, 3/32 inch punch, and we'll push out this pin right here. So this is the trigger hinge pin. So this is what controls everything. It's got the trigger captured, the slide stop captured. It's got your trigger return spring captured in there. So you can see there's a bigger head on the left side of the frame, smaller on the right. So we'll tap out on this right side. 3/32 or 1/8 inch punch. All right, there it is. You can see the head on it there. So we'll replicate that when we put it back in. And then we pull it all apart. You can see how that trigger return spring is captured in there. All right, we just need to remove the locking block. You'll notice there's a little spring there for that takedown lever to locate into as well on the locking block. So we're just going to pry up. Locking block comes right up and out. Just like that. Set our locking block down. Now you can see our slide stop here. And that spring, that leg of the spring is captured under the locking block. So we can set our slide stop aside. You can see this trigger linkage here as well. So you can see trigger, trigger return spring, trigger bar. And this may just pop right out like this, but take notice of this linkage, how this trigger bar locates into the Sear housing. So you'll see right there how that trigger bar drops right into that little channel in the Sear housing. We'll get a better look at it here in a second. All right, so now we'll pull up on the ejector, then take your 3/32 inch punch, it's a perfect fit, and just pry up on that Sear housing. And then it all comes out together just like this. Sear housing, trigger bar, trigger, all the linkage there together. We'll get a nice up close look, but everything else is out of there for the most part, except the mag release. So this is the Sear housing and the trigger bar and how it engages right here. So you can see that perfect little fit right there. And you can see this little portion is what engages the Sear. So we want to make sure that's all replicated when we put it back together. So we should be able to see that Sear moving with the trigger bar moving back and forth. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. So we'll go ahead and set down the trigger and trigger bar for a second. We need to do one more thing here in the Sear housing. So we're going to actually push out this Sear hinge pin right here. So you notice there's a bigger head there, which locates with the ejector. So it keeps the ejector in place. So we're going to push out on that little Sear hinge pin. I'm just using 3/32 inch punch. Pushing it right through. You can see the pin. Larger head right there, which locates in with the ejector. Set that down. All right, so just take notice how that Sear is located in there. So you can see that little tab there, how it locates in place. All right. in reference to the ejector. You can see it's on that side. You can see this rectangular squared portion fits in the back of the Sear housing. All right, I always like to kind of point that out and memorize it as I go. So we can pull the Sear right out. So now you can see that detent inside with the Sear spring. So we need to remove the Sear spring and detent. All right, comes right out, and you can see how it dropped right in that pocket there. So that's exactly where we're going to be going with it. So we'll go ahead and we'll put these aside. We're going to do the polishing first and then swap out the springs, but notice this Sear spring's painted yellow from the factory, so pretty easy to tell them apart. So that's nice. Set everything aside. So set the Sear housing aside. We're going to keep the Sear. Then we'll take the trigger and trigger bar. We'll go ahead and remove this trigger return spring. We don't need it. Now notice there is an open loop down here on the trigger return spring. That's what locates and hooks right there on the trigger bar. And notice the loop's facing up. We're going to do the same thing. And the closed loop is facing forward. That's so that hinge pin can locate through it. So we'll just go ahead and pop out this trigger return spring, set it in the bag of stock parts. Now we're going to polish up this whole thing. No need to pull it off the trigger. We don't really need to polish anything up here, predominantly back here. All this little linkage right here is what we're going to polish. Unless you feel some rough burrs or anything like that, you know, I do feel a little bit right here, so I might hit it with that 1000 grit and some of that grease. So we'll just do that real quick. You know, this is the most important part. This is what's touching the actual striker safety. So we'll get that greased up, throw a little synthetic grease on that 1000 grit. Just kind of work any of those burrs that you might feel on the sides or the top. Just make sure it's nice and burr free. You know, this is a mass production part, so they didn't take their time to come back and smooth it all out like this. It'd just be way too expensive. I'm just knocking off those little burrs on the side. Gonna hit the top real quick. Just kind of getting the heavy stuff off because polishing is not removing any sort of material. You know, this 1000 grit is very slightly, so if there's a burr there, it'll take it off, but it's not really going to change the geometry in any significant way, which is nice. So no need to stress. It's all about smoothness. It's all about finishing work. We're not trying to modify geometry. You're kind of feeling your way through it. You know, once you feel that part smooth out against the paper, you know you're done. I'm pressing fairly hard right now. You know, it's just in my hands. You know, I'm not pressing down on the table. I'm just trying to make sure I get everything nicely rounded. Those edges are no longer sharp. They're kind of just nice little small radiuses on them, real tiny. But it makes a big difference. Eliminates all that drag and grittiness. And you may even see it start to kind of rip into the paper, so you know you found a little gritty spot when you do see that. All right, check your progress. Oh yeah, that feels way better. Nice and smooth, okay? So we're good there. We can check the Sear real quick, but I doubt there's much we need to do on it. You know, this is the engagement surface right here. It's pretty dang smooth already, so I'm not gonna mess with it, but if you feel some burrs there, you know, it just doesn't hurt to just throw a little synthetic grease on it, wet sand, and take your little 1000 grit and just kind of run it over it real fast. You know, definitely small amount of time on the Sear. Just knocking any burrs off. All right, there we go. So we'll jump into the polishing now. All right, so we're all set up for polishing again. So I got my Flitz polish over here. I'm gonna saturate the bit. I put a fresh bit on. I can't believe I actually wore one out. It's the first time I've ever done it on camera, so I'm gonna be a little bit more delicate this time. I'm not gonna be as pressed for time, even though I'm trying to beat my hour and a half long shield video. All right, so all we did was we coated up the Sear and coated up the trigger bar with flits, got the bit saturated with flits, we're ready to go. We're gonna mainly hit this portion of the trigger bar and then the engagement surface back here, this flat portion of the Sear. All right, we're gonna start with the trigger bar first, this portion primarily, and then we'll just kind of get a once over on the rest. Let's check our progress here, see how we're doing. All right, not bad, it's starting to shine up. Still got some residue on there, so it's hard to really see. We're gonna hit this portion really good again, and that'll be about it. We'll move on to the Sear. Saturate the bit good. All right, so that was second pass on the trigger bar. Really spent a good amount of time on that engagement surface there that interacts with the striker safety, so everything's blinging, looking great. We're gonna clean it up, obviously with some CLP. Let's go ahead and get the sear now. We're gonna get this engagement surface primarily, all right, but really the whole sear. I mean, a lot of different pieces of metal are engaging with the sear, so we wanna make sure it's nice and buttery smooth. Saturate it, clean the bit, saturate the bit, wipe it off, good. All right, bit's all saturated. It's definitely a difficult one to polish, but well worth it. You just got to hold it on that towel. So you can see, man, we really polished really well here on this engagement surface. So let's go ahead and clean these up and take a better look at them. All right, so I just saturated it real good, and I'm just wiping it down in these little crevices with a Q-tip, trying to get all that flitz out of there. I already wiped down the majority of the part, but it's pretty stubborn, so it helps to really soak it good and clean it up nice. You don't want any of this residue lingering. All right, so you can see the trigger bar there, just a blinging, man. That's gonna be buttery smooth. Oh man, that is nice. All right, so that's gonna be really clean, smooth trigger pull. Loving this already. shined up perfectly. So just a little hand work there really went a long way. Detailed finishing work for these parts. So Sear, like glass, man. Look at how shiny that thing is. So this is really going to contribute to a nice, clean, smooth trigger pull. Cannot wait to see the difference once we get these parts back in. So let's go ahead and do that. All cleaned up, ready to go. All right, so these are all the components here for the reassembly for the frame. So we've got the locking block. We've got one of the takedown pins. This is a trigger hinge pin here with the little head on it at the end. Trigger, trigger bar, factory trigger return spring. We're going to swap these in a second. Takedown lever, slide stop. Then over here, we got our little Sear housing assembly. So we got our Sear spring and the little detent. We got our Sear hinge pin. This is another takedown pin for the frame holding the Sear housing in the frame. So what we'll do is put the Sear housing together first and then put the rest of the pieces back in the frame. All right, so while you're at it, let's go ahead and grab those stock springs. I've got a little stock spring bag going here. So there's that one. And then I'm going to take a little yellow Sear spring, throw it in the bag. I think it's handy having the two bags going, especially when you got a kit like this. Keeping the little Sear spring detent in hand. Go ahead and grab the MCARBO springs, the rest of them. All right, so this is our heavy duty trigger return spring, so we'll place it up here. This is a little trigger return spring installation tool. Put that up there with that. And last but not least, our Sear spring. So we'll go ahead and put them together like this. One real easy little trick is take some of that synthetic grease and put it on the end of that detent and then put the spring on. It'll kind of hold it all together nicely, so you don't have to fight that. A little frustration-free tip always helps. All right, so let's put this Sear housing back together first. All right, so we got our Sear housing here. So we'll take our Sear spring with the detent and we'll drop it right in that pocket there in the Sear housing. Sometimes you get a little lucky and it'll fall right in. Use your punch, just kind of push it the rest of the way in. All right, so the Sear spring and detent are in place. All right, now we'll take our Sear and we're going to insert it just like this. Got that little tab facing you away from the ejector up here. This little squared portion, rectangular portion towards the back of the housing. That's what's going to rest over top of that spring and detent, just like that. All right, so we need to line up the holes and then push the pin through. So the pin's got a head on it and we're going to push it through on this side so it locates with the ejector there. So you can see there's the head of the Sear hinge pin right here. So we're going to drop it right in, get it started, and we're going to just watch from this side to line it up. So moving it up and down, and then we're just pushing through on the opposite side and make sure it's captured. Press down on it, make sure it hinges up and down. Good. All right, man, so ejector's located, we're in place. Take a little synthetic grease, put a little dab down there, it won't hurt. Just help getting a little more lubricity. Just love it, man. This thing's gonna feel like butter. Put a little dab down there on that engagement surface. That's where the trigger bar is gonna be rubbing. I mean, it's just small, but every little bit helps. All right, so now we can go ahead and set this down for a second. Let's put the rest of the components in the frame. All right, so we're definitely on the downhill slope now. We're gonna take our trigger and trigger bar, and we'll take our heavy duty trigger return spring, and we'll go ahead and position it accordingly. So remember that little hook is gonna be facing up right here, and that's gonna locate inside that little hole on the trigger bar, just like so. This loop is gonna be forward. Now we're gonna take our little installation tool and capture that loop. But before we do that, we're gonna grab our slide stop and make it all happen at once. So we'll position the slide stop just like that. This little spring is facing up in the air. All right, that'll be compressed by the locking block. And we'll go ahead and start pushing in that installation tool so that we capture the slide stop and the trigger. All right, now we need to get this loop up here over that installation tool. All right, so making sure we got the right orientation with that trigger return spring. See that little loop facing up, and that's what's hooked on the trigger bar. Closed loop is up front. That's what's gonna locate on that installation tool. So we just push forward with the trigger bar, get the holes to line up, push that tool all the way through. Just got to get the holes on the other side to line up. There we go. And that'll keep everything together, man. This is a lifesaver. This makes it a really stress-free installation. So I love this. So what we'll do now is drop this whole assembly into the frame. So just push that trigger forward as we do. So push that trigger forward. Want to get the slide lock to drop into place. You got these little notches here on both sides of the frame, so that's a nice little guide. And then obviously you want to make sure we get this installation tool lined up with this hole here on the frame. So we'll make sure we push them all in, get everything to compress. All right, good. All right, so we got our trigger, slide stop, and trigger bar in place. We just need to drop in the locking block now. Make sure that little takedown lever spring is in place just like that on the locking block. All right, we're going to drop it right in. Also, double check and make sure that takedown pin is not going to interfere with this locking block. So it should be an exact size to this mechanism here, but if it's not, you may have to sand it down just a hair. It is a composite material, so it'll sand fairly well. All right, so all you got to do is drop in the locking block. We want to capture that spring right there, the little leg sticking up for the slide stop. And then we want to make sure we get these two tabs here on the locking block to locate in those two notches on the frame. So that's your first reference point to line up. All right, got it going in there. Now we're going to look back here and make sure all the trigger linkage is going together properly. All right, good. So we got our locking block located inside the frame. All right, at this point, we want to make sure everything's good up here with the trigger. All right, so now we want to make sure this little leg on the trigger bar locates in this pocket right here on the Sear housing. All right, so we want to make sure it's at least in there, and we want it also to engage the Sear, just like that. So we'll keep it nice and compressed. It's kind of similar to the locking block. So you'll notice there's a notch right up front here that post needs to go in. And you can see the pocket on the other side down in there. Then we're going to just push forward a little bit on that Sear housing, get it to locate in those channels on the frame. It snaps right in place. Love that sound. Very good sound. And then we're going to push down on the locking block. So everything is compressed and in place at this point. What we can do is start putting some pins in, but let's make sure we can get that trigger hinge pin in first before we completely commit to it. You don't want to have to do all that and then back it out later. So this is the trigger hinge pin. It's got a little head on it there, and it's going to go in on this side with the little recess cut for it. So we're going to push through. As we're doing this, you want to make sure that that trigger return spring, that loop, locates on this pin. Every now and again, if it's pushing through, it may tend to jam up, so we want to make sure we keep an eye on that. And we can just press down on the table and push it through, and you're going to have to wiggle the trigger just a little bit as you're watching it. All right, now we want to make sure that pin captures trigger return spring. So you can see it started to kind of push the trigger return spring out of the way. So I'm just going to grab that trigger return spring and just pop it right on the pin. Just like that, center it right up on the pin, and I just shot that little assembly tool right through. But that's good, nice clean, press through. Otherwise it'd be a nightmare trying to line everything up incrementally. Those little installation tools are a lifesaver. Keep your sanity. Then a 1/8 inch punch, we're going to go ahead and just tap in that hinge pin just a hair. Just want to make sure our trigger hinge pin is completely compressed, because this is where the takedown lever operates. All right, so now we just need to put the two pins in, then the takedown lever. So we got our two pins, start dropping them in. If you got them mixed up, don't worry about it. They're exactly the same. It's not going to be the end of the world. Got my little brass punch, leaving little pieces of brass everywhere. All right, so take your 1/8 inch punch and just finish it off. You want to get them even on both sides. So a few taps and we'll check our work. All right, it's pretty flush. Now the good thing is this side, you can have a little excess over here because that's where the takedown lever is going to stop anyway. It kind of works like a stop. So we're going to clean this up, make sure it's even here. All right, good. I'm just going to tap this side through a little bit. I'd rather it be on the takedown lever side, because that takedown lever is going to hit right there. But I'm so OCD, it's got to be perfect. There it is. So it's nice and flush on both sides. All right, and a little bit hanging out. That's where the takedown lever hits and stops. Speaking of that takedown lever, so here it is, the takedown lever. You'll notice there's a little tiny flat up top here and a little flat on the bottom here. So we're going to take that little flat on the bottom, and we're just going to push it right through. It's going to hit that spring, and it's going to give it just enough clearance to get through. And then it's through, we'll rotate it all the way around until it's down, in the down position like this, and then we'll line up that hole and we'll just push it the rest of the way through. And it's in just like that. All right, so we're ready to go. Everything's back in. Locking block, slide stop, ejector's still there, trigger bar, new trigger return spring. It's interacting and engaging with that Sear, all beautifully polished and blinging. Feels good already, man. You can tell the difference, nice and clean. All right, so now we just need to put the slide back on and we are done. All right, now we'll go ahead and insert the slide. Just line it up, slide it back. All right, we want to lock the slide back, and then we can rotate the lever. It's locked back. Now we rotate the lever. There we go. All good to go now. Do a function check. Reset, good. Nice. Oh man, that is clean. There we go. I'm loving this. All right, let's measure this trigger pull. Let's see what kind of modified trigger pull we got. 3 pounds, 10.6 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 3 pounds, 8.8 ounces. Well, there you have it, guys. A fantastic trigger improvement for the M&P pistols. Just love, reset is crisp. That is one thing that we wanted to make sure was right on, man, was the reset's got to be nice and crisp so that secondary shot is quick. You don't want a sluggish, crappy reset. So really love how smooth this trigger is. As you rail out, it's just natural. It just naturally wants to break for you. And I really like that feeling, much more than the way it was at 7 pounds almost. It was just a terrible trigger pull. It was tough, man. And plus it was gritty too. Yeah, I get it, 7 pounds, no big deal. But man, if you're shooting round after round, you want to be accurate, it is a big deal. I mean, to have a nice, smooth, clean, light trigger pull is just fantastic. Really love 3.5 pound trigger compared to a 7 pound trigger. Just night and day difference, phenomenal. Oh man, that's what I'm talking about. Really love this. I hope you guys get some excellent results with this, the sanding, the polishing. I hope it was informative. We always appreciate a subscribe or a like or anything like that. Not to mention, if you don't want to do all this yourself, go ahead and give us a call. We got the custom shop. We'll do it for you. Just check out the website. It's on there, the custom shop rates and everything else and how to send it in. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you, MCARBO brother, for your ideas and your support. As always, happy shooting.